Closing.
Today, the jury in the Alex Murdaugh trial toured his South Carolina home and property to see where his wife and son were murdered. Defense attorneys requested the visit to give jurors a better sense of the space where the victims were killed. Alex Murdaugh says he did not kill his wife nor his son. The prosecution gave its closing arguments today.
The opportunity to commit these crimes, and also whose guilty conduct after these crimes betrays him. The defendant was the one person who was living a lie. The defendant is the person on which a storm was descending, and the defendant is a person where his own storm would actually mean consequences for Maggie and Paul, and consequences for those who trusted him. And that person is the defendant, Richard Alexander Murdaugh.
So the defense gives its closing arguments tomorrow. We want to bring in 9 News legal analyst Whitney Traylor. I'm surprised that Alex Murdaugh actually, spoke in his own defense. Yes. Like, what was going through his lawyer's head to allow that to happen?
Well, I am surprised, and I'm sure this was against his lawyer's advice, but I'm also not surprised because you have to consider he's very well known in that community. He is a lawyer. He serves as a part-time prosecutor, so he knows
what he's doing.
That's exactly right. And that was actually one of the suggestions by the prosecution, was that he knew, as a lawyer, as a prosecutor, part-time prosecutor, he knew what he needed to do to set this thing up, if you will. So in that regard, the fact that he knows juries, he's confident, lots of lawyers have big egos, that's not surprising in that regard. But I'm sure most lawyers, defense lawyers, would have advised him not to do that.
And yet, when you think about that, and it is, yeah. And he was emotional. He talked about his addictions and all the other issues in his life. Really, I mean, from your perspective, is his job just to win over one juror?
Well, that's the exact...
Just to convince one.
Yeah. In one way, it is just to convince one. Another way of looking at it is they have to go beyond a reasonable doubt. And so the burden is really on the prosecution.
Yes.
But you raise a great point. I mean, we're one of the few countries in the world with a jury system, which is beautiful because we get to sit across the table and look at somebody and say, no, this doesn't add up, or this does add up. And it was interesting that you mentioned that because I watched some of the trial, I watched some of the closing today. But when he testified, it was really interesting because he admitted to lying about where he was had he seen them beforehand. And they said, why did you lie? And he gave this kind of bizarre explanation. But then in doing so, he apologized. And me as a juror sitting there watching him, this is where he lost my credibility. Because he apologized to the family and this elongated apology. And he said, I would never intentionally do anything to hurt one of them, ever, ever. And the fact that he used intentionally, and he just went on and on about this real random sort of apology, it just didn't ring true with me. But that's part of the jury system. And then we go and deliberate, and who convinces who. And it does have to be a unanimous jury. And they have 12 jurors and 2 alternates, but it'll be 12 that ultimately make the decision.
I want to ask you, the jury being allowed to actually visit the murder site, I don't know that I've ever heard of that before. That's kind of unusual.
It is unusual. Now, sometimes it makes sense for a jury to go to a site, not necessarily a murder site, but a car accident site or whatever, just to make sense. And this was a request by the defense. So I'm not exactly sure what their intention was, but the judge was actually there as well. There was strict security, and they were instructed they couldn't ask questions. So they spent about 30 minutes there, and I don't know, maybe because there were questions about how far the house, not questions, but he was in the house versus being in the
dog kennels,
barn area, the kennels. So maybe they wanted to get some spatial ideas on the distance, but yes, that is unusual that the judge allowed that.
Distraction.
Yeah.
I don't.
And they're also trying to say it could have been 2 shooters, and so maybe that was part of the reasoning.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe you need to come back when there's a verdict and tell us what it means.
I suspect they'll deliberate for probably a week, and unless it's a hung jury, they can't come to a decision, then it has to be unanimous. And so, as you say, it's just could just be one person.
Okay, Whitney, more to talk about. Maybe part 2 next week. We'll see. Thank you.
Here.
All right, thanks.
See you.